Earlier this month, China expressed strong indignation after a U.S. warship entered China's territorial waters near the Nansha Islands maritime area in the South China Sea. This is the third such incident since last October, and China has responded, saying the actions by the U.S. have threatened China's sovereignty and security interests. In a moment, I will talk with guests from China and the U.S., but we begin with CCTV correspondent Wang, who joins us from Beijing. Can you tell us more about these three U.S. incursions in the South China Sea since last October?
Sure. There have been three incidents in a little more than 6 months. The first one occurred on October 27th last year. The USS Lesson entered the waters near Nansha Islands in the South China Sea. China monitored, followed, and warned the U.S. vessel. And the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang issued a solemn warning to America, urging the U.S. not to stir up trouble. The second incident occurred 3 months later on January 30th last year, when the U.S. Navy guided missile sailed within 12 nautical miles of the Zhongjian in the Shisha Islands, also in the South China Sea. The U.S. said it was an innocent passage and consistent with international law, but Beijing opposed this claim. The most recent incident happened earlier this month on the 10th. The USS William Lawrence destroyer entered waters near China's Nansha Islands. China once again monitored, followed, and issued warnings. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lu Kang said America's provocative actions are the greatest threat to the peace and stability, as well as navigation and overflight freedom in the South China Sea.
Right, now there has been strong reaction from China. What more can you tell us about that?
Well, in response to the latest incident, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lu Kang said at a briefing that this action by the U.S. threatened China's sovereignty and security interests, endangered the staff and the facilities on the reef, and damaged the regional peace and stability. China resolutely opposes this action by the U.S. and has reiterated the stance many times. Lu also said the U.S. came up with the so-called Freedom of Navigation scheme before the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which was signed in 1979. He said America's action is an obvious military challenge to the new marine order. It has been met with oppositions from many countries. Also, it has to be noted that the U.S. has refused to join the convention.
Okay, thank you. That's CCTV's Wang reporting from Beijing. And joining us now via Skype from Hawaii is Mark Valencia. He is a maritime policy analyst and former senior fellow at the East-West Center. Mark, welcome to the show.
Well, my pleasure. This is a significant issue.
The United States recently conducted 3 so-called freedom of navigation operations near these Chinese islands. That was since last October. Why do you think the U.S. is doing this? What's the motivation?
Well, there's both immediate reasons and more fundamental reasons. The more immediate reasons are, at least according to the U.S. government, Pentagon, the U.S. is concerned with China's building of islands in the area, that is, building upon submerged features. And what the U.S. alleges is their militarization. However, in a more technical sense, it is challenging legally China's regime of requiring prior notification for warships to enter a territorial sea around some of these features. But frankly, more fundamentally, the U.S. is demonstrating its power, its might, its presence, and its resolve to continue to be a dominant or leading force in Asia.
Now, Mark, you have written that these operations are controversial. Elaborate on that for us, please.
Well, they're controversial in a variety of ways. I mean, one is simply the confrontational and, if you will, the gunboat diplomacy aspect, the loss of face that China must undergo because of the publicity surrounding them, but also because the United States has not ratified the UN Law of the Sea Convention. So it is basically interpreting different provisions of it and deciding what is and is not international law without even being a party to the convention.
Now, that convention that you mentioned, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS as it's known, what are the implications of the fact that the US has not ratified that? In a sense, is the US here putting its own interests above that of the rest of the world?
Well, there's two major implications for the US. One is that it doesn't have much legitimacy or credibility in trying to interpret key terms to its benefit. Key terms like marine scientific research, which requires consent. They claim, the US claims that it's doing military research in China's EEZ, and therefore it doesn't need consent. Or the phrase due regard, that either both the coastal state and the user state must show to each other and each other's laws. But more fundamentally, the US doesn't have access to the dispute settlement mechanisms of the convention. And because it doesn't have access to these mechanisms, it is reduced to bullying its way. That is, of demonstrating through the show of military might what it considers the correct interpretation.
And how will this, the relationship be affected, the overall relationship between China and the United States?
Well, so far, the good news is that both have actually shown considerable restraint. That is, that China has monitored and checked on the phone-ops and even with the close-in surveillance and so on, but has not used force to ward them off. And the U.S. has not responded to any untoward behavior by China, as it might view it. So they've successfully isolated these issues from the other more important ones, or what they consider, should consider more important, like fighting climate change, the Korean Peninsula denuclearization, and so on. But as these confrontations go on, and as nationalists on both sides push their leadership to take action, the results could spill over into these other areas and sour the whole relationship.
Mark Valencia, thanks for joining us, sir.